Ambassador Velsha stood at the observation deck of Concordat Station, Harmony, and watched the human vessel approach through the darkness of space. The ship, called Endeavor, moved with careful precision toward the docking ring, while station lights reflected off its white and blue hull. Velsha's compound eyes tracked every detail of the approaching craft, and she felt her thorax tighten with anticipation. Today marked a historic moment, humanity's formal introduction to the Galactic Concordat. After 3 years of careful negotiations and cultural exchanges, the Concordat represented 47 species who had evolved beyond violence and conflict through millennia of social development and genetic refinement. War existed only in historical archives now, and weapons were museum pieces that young students studied with confused fascination. Vols had spent months preparing for this day and reviewing every file about the strange bipedal species from the planet they called Earth. Humans seemed friendly enough in communications, eager to learn, quick to laugh, and genuinely excited about joining the greater galactic community. They had agreed to all Concordat protocols without complaint, including the absolute prohibition on weapons within Concordat. Space security scans of the Endeavor had confirmed complete compliance. No weapons, no armor, no military-grade technology aboard. The humans had even seemed amused by the requirement, and their ambassador, Chun, had joked that they were happy to leave such things behind. Velsha clicked her mandibles in satisfaction as the docking clamps engaged with a solid thunk that vibrated through the deck. Within minutes, the airlock cycled, and the human delegation emerged into the station's main concourse. Ambassador Chen led the group, a small human female with dark hair tied back and warm brown eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She wore simple, formal clothing in shades of blue and moved with an easy confidence that Velsha found reassuring. Behind her came 3 security personnel in matching gray uniforms, and Velsha noted they carried no visible weapons or equipment. The largest of the 3 was a male human named Marcus Webb, according to the manifest, a former soldier who now served as chief of security for diplomatic missions. Webb stood nearly 2 meters tall with broad shoulders and dark skin, and he scanned the area with alert eyes that never stopped moving. Velsha stepped forward and extended her forearms in the traditional Concordat greeting. "Welcome, Ambassador Chun," she said in carefully practiced human English. "The Concordat rejoices in your arrival." Chun smiled broadly and returned the gesture with both her arms. "Thank you, Ambassador Velsha. We're honored to be here and grateful for your patience with us during this long process." The formal ceremonies proceeded smoothly over the next several hours as dignitaries from various Concordat species arrived to meet the humans. The Bralock representative towered over everyone at 3 meters tall, with thick gray skin like living stone and small eyes that gleamed with curiosity. The Whisper delegation floated in their containment spheres, gaseous beings who communicated through color changes in their cloudy forms. Crystalline shardborn clinked and chimed as they moved, while the aquatic deepborn observed from their water-filled mobility tanks. Humans fascinated everyone with their expressive faces and constant gestures, and the way they seemed genuinely interested in each species they met. Chen demonstrated remarkable diplomatic skill, asking thoughtful questions and sharing information about Earth with infectious enthusiasm. Webb and his team remained in the background, but Velsha noticed they never truly relaxed, and their eyes constantly tracked everyone nearby. After the ceremonies concluded, Velsha suggested a tour of the station's commercial district, where species from across the bush. The Sosha suggested a tour of the station's commercial district, where species from across the Concordat mingled freely. The humans agreed eagerly, and the group made their way through the bustling corridors filled with beings of every imaginable shape and size. They stopped at a neutral zone establishment that served refreshments compatible with hundreds of different biochemistries. Bar occupied a large circular space with environmental zones for different atmospheric requirements and gravity Fields adjusted by Section Chen, and her team settled in the oxygen-nitrogen zone along with Velsha and several other delegates who could breathe similar atmospheres. Drinks were ordered and conversation flowed easily as the humans shared stories about Earth and listened to tales from far-flung worlds. Velsha relaxed for the first time that day and allowed herself to feel optimistic about humanity's integration into Concordat society. Then a brolic merchant named Court stumbled into their section, already intoxicated on fermented algae extract. Court was young for his species and known for causing trouble in the commercial district. Despite multiple warnings from station security, he spotted the humans and laughed, a deep rumbling sound, like rocks grinding together. So these are the famous Terrans. Court slurred as he approached. They look weak and soft like those slug creatures from Deneb 9. Chun stood carefully and spoke in a calm voice. We mean no offense, friend. Perhaps you should rest before. Court's massive hand shot out faster than his size suggested possible and shoved a young human crew member named Peters, flew backward and crashed into a table that collapsed under his weight while other patrons gasped and scattered web moved before Velsha could even process what was happening. The large human flowed across the space with impossible speed and grace. While his hands blurred through motions, Velsha couldn't track. Court swung a fist the size of a human torso, but Webb wasn't there anymore. He'd shifted to the side by mere centimeters. Webb's palm struck Court's extended elbow with a sharp crack, and the brolic bellowed in pain as his arm bent at an unnatural angle. Two of Court's friends charged forward to help, but Webb spun low and swept one's legs, while simultaneously driving his other fist into the second attacker's solar plexus. The first friend crashed to the deck, hard enough to crack the composite flooring, while the second folded around Webb's fist and collapsed. Court roared and lunged forward, but Webb sidestepped again and used the Brolic's own momentum against him. A quick twist and Court's legs tangled while Webb applied pressure to specific points on the massive alien's neck within 6 seconds of the first shove. All four Brolic lay on the ground, 3 unconscious and Court groaning weakly. Webb stepped back and straightened his uniform while breathing only slightly harder than before. Station security arrived moments later with their non-lethal restraint. Fields ready, but found nothing to do except collect the fallen troublemakers. Chen apologized profusely while Webb checked on Peters, who had already picked himself up with only minor bruises, stood frozen as her mind tried to process what she had witnessed. The humans had used no weapons and no tools, only their bare hands and bodies moving with terrifying precision. Webb had ended a confrontation with 4 beings, each twice his mass, in less time than it took most species to recognize danger. Other patrons whispered nervously, and some edged away from the human delegation, while fear sense filled the air. Velsha approached Chun carefully and kept her voice level despite her racing thoughts. Ambassador, that was quite impressive, she said while choosing her words with care. Chun looked embarrassed and gestured apologetically. I'm so sorry, Ambassador Velsha. Marcus was just protecting our crew member, and he showed remarkable restraint. Restraint, Velsha thought while watching Webb help Peters to a chair. Security officer had moved with such controlled violence that it spoke of extensive training and vast experience. Yet the humans claimed to have brought no weapons, and the scans had confirmed their vessels carried no military technology. Velsha's mind churned with a disturbing realization as she watched the humans settle back into their seats as if nothing unusual had occurred. Perhaps the Concordat had been asking the wrong questions during their security screenings. They had searched for weapons and found none. But what if the weapons had been standing in front of them all along? The incident report landed on Velsha's desk 3 days after the bar confrontation, and she read it with growing unease. Station security had classified the event as a minor disturbance with no lasting injuries, but they had included detailed sensor recordings. Velsha played the footage again, and watched Webb move through the attack with fluid efficiency. She slowed the playback to quarter speed and still struggled to track all his movements. Concordat Science Council had requested a meeting to discuss what they called concerning biological factors. Regarding the human species, Vesha arrived at the council chamber to find 12 of the Concordat's top xenobiologists already reviewing data on holographic displays. Dr. Crinsha, an elderly shardborn whose crystalline body chimed softly with each movement, gestured toward a rotating model of human anatomy. Ambassador Velsha, we have completed our analysis of the human delegation's biological scans, Crinsha said in her musical voice, and the findings are quite disturbing. Velsha settled into her chair and watched his various body systems, highlighted in different colors across the hologram. Humans evolved on a world they call a death world, though they seem unaware this designation is unusual. Crinsha continued, their planet has extreme temperature variations, dangerous predators, toxic plants, and aggressive microbial life. Another scientist named Pelkor activated a new display showing human evolutionary history. The humans descended from persistence hunters. Pelkor said while his tentacles writhed with agitation. Their ancestors literally chased prey animals until exhaustion killed them. Velsha felt her thorax tighten as she absorbed this information. Persistence hunting was considered one of the most ruthless predator strategies in the known galaxy, wearing down victims through relentless pursuit. Notice their eyes, Crinsha added while zooming in on the human face model. Forward-facing with binocular vision, a classic predator trait. They have excellent depth perception for tracking prey, and their eyes can switch between focused detail vision and broad motion detection. The display shifted to show the human digestive system, omnivorous metabolism, allowing them to consume both plant and animal matter. Another scientist chimed in, highly adaptable to various food sources. Humans can survive for weeks without food and days without water, much longer than most species their size. Velsha listened as the scientist detailed aspect after aspect of human biology that painted a picture she found increasingly alarming. Their skeletal structure provided attachment points for dense muscle fibers that generated surprising force. Their nervous system featured redundant pathways that allowed them to function even with significant injuries. They possess something called an adrenaline response that temporarily increased strength, speed, pain tolerance, and mental focus during threats. This adrenaline effect can boost their physical capabilities by 30 to 50% for brief periods, Crinsha explained, and they can consciously trigger it through training. But surely they're still fragile compared to armored species like the Bralok. Velsha protested. I've seen their skin. It's thin and easily damaged. Pelkor made a gesture of negation with his tentacles. Yes, their skin lacks natural armor, but observe their pain tolerance metrics, he said while displaying comparative data. Humans can continue functioning with injuries that would incapacitate most Concordat species. They have also developed extensive medical knowledge specifically focused on keeping injured individuals alive and mobile during combat conditions. The presentation continued, and each new detail added to Velsha's growing concern. Humans possess throwing accuracy. Their shoulder joints and visual processing allowed them to turn virtually any object into a deadly projectile. Their hands featured opposable thumbs with fine motor control, capable of crafting tools and weapons from available materials. They could survive in atmospheric compositions, temperatures, and gravity levels that would kill most other species. We pulled historical records from their databases with Ambassador Chen's permission, Crinsha said quietly, and what we found was deeply troubling. The display filled with images from human history, battlefields covered in bodies, weapons of increasing sophistication, conflicts spanning their entire recorded civilization. They have never stopped fighting, Pelkor said with something like horror in his voice. Every generation, every culture, continuous warfare for their entire existence as a species. Velcia watched footage of human soldiers training, practicing hand-to-hand combat, learning to use every part of their environment as a weapon. The training methods looked like torture to her eyes, but the humans endured without complaint. They teach their warriors to improvise and adapt, Krincha explained, to see solutions where others see obstacles. Every human soldier learns dozens of combat techniques and studies the art of violence as seriously as we study philosophy. More footage showed human entertainment, action movies featuring elaborate fight scenes, contact sports where humans struck each other for recreation. One sport called boxing involved two humans trying to render each other unconscious using only their fists. This is their entertainment, a shocked whisper delegate said while their containment sphere flickered with distressed colors. They enjoy watching simulated violence. Not simulated, Palcor corrected. Those sports involve real physical contact and actual injuries. Humans consider this a normal pastime, and even children participate in modified versions. The council chamber fell silent as the scientists finished their presentation. Vols felt several of her stomachs churning with anxiety as the implications settled over the group. "What do you recommend?" she asked finally. "Should we revoke their Concordat admission?" Before anyone could answer, alarms blared throughout the station. An emergency lighting activated. Volsha saw. Communicator crackled to life with a panicked voice from station control. "Hull breach in Sector 7. Coolant leak spreading through residential zones," the controller reported. "We're evacuating all personnel, but 53 individuals are trapped behind sealed emergency bulkheads. Rescue teams are assembling, but environmental suits can only handle the toxic coolant for 6 minutes maximum." Velcia rushed to the command center with the scientists following behind while her mind raced through response protocols. The situation looked grim on the tactical displays. The trapped individuals included members from 5 different species, all with different environmental requirements. The coolant filling those corridors would kill most of them within 10 minutes. "Where are the human delegates?" Velcia asked suddenly, still in their quarters. "In Sector 9. A controller responded while checking his board. "We've issued evacuation orders to all nearby sections." Velcia's communicator chimed again, and Webb's calm voice came through clearly despite background alarms. "Ambassador Velcia, we're reading environmental alerts near the trapped civilians," Webb said without preamble. "Requesting permission to assist rescue operations." "Negative." Velcia responded quickly. "The coolant is extremely toxic, and rescue teams need specialized equipment." There was a pause, then Chun's voice replaced Webb's. "Ambassador, with respect, we've reviewed the coolant specifications and humans can survive brief exposure," Chun said firmly. "My security team is already suited up in basic environment gear, and we're heading there now." "Ambassador Chun, I cannot authorize." Velcia began, but Chun had already cut the connection. Security feeds showed the 3 human security officers sprinting through corridors towards Sector 7 while other species fled in the opposite direction. They wore only basic environment suits, nothing like the heavy protective gear the official rescue teams required. Velcia watched in horror as Webb led his team directly into the coolant-filled sections without hesitation. The temperature readings showed negative 40 degrees while toxic. Fumes reduced visibility to almost zero, yet the humans moved purposefully through the corridors and reached the sealed bulkhead, where the trapped civilians huddled. Webb examined the door mechanism for bare seconds, then began manually overriding the lock while coolant vapor swirled around him. The other 2 humans organized the terrified civilians and calmed them with quick efficiency. Despite the hostile environment, within 4 minutes, the bulkhead opened and the humans began evacuating the trapped individuals. They carried those too weak to walk and guided others through the safest paths while their own suits showed critical damage warnings. Peters collapsed halfway through from coolant exposure. but recovered and kept moving, while his suit integrity dropped to 15%. The last civilian cleared the danger zone just as official rescue teams arrived in their heavy gear webs. Teams staggered out behind them and immediately began checking on the rescued individuals, rather than seeking medical attention for themselves. Station medical staff rushed forward to treat the humans, who waved them off insistently. "We're fine," Webb said while wisps of toxic coolant still rose from his damaged suit. "Check the civilians first, especially the deep burn. They're more vulnerable to this stuff than we are." Velsha arrived at the medical bay 20 minutes later to find all 3 humans had refused treatment until every other injured party had been seen. Webb sat calmly filling out incident reports while medical scanners showed he had second-degree chemical burns across 30% of his body. He looked up as Velsha approached and gave her a slight smile. The emergency alarms woke Velsha from a restless sleep. 6 weeks after the humans had officially joined the Concordat, her communicator displayed a priority alert. Terrorist attack in progress on Station Harmony. She rushed to the command center, while her hearts hammered against her thorax, and found chaos waiting. Station Security Chief Zarkoth, a 4-armed Karnathi warrior, stood at the tactical display with his face rigid in controlled fury. "Septari purists," he growled while gesturing at the map. "They've seized control of the diplomatic wing and taken hostages. The Septari are demanding immediate expulsion of humanity from the Concordat, and they're threatening to kill 1 hostage every hour until we comply." Velsha felt cold fear wash through her as she realized Ambassador Chung and her entire delegation were in that section. "How many attackers?" she demanded while scanning the tactical readouts. 12 confirmed, Zarkoth replied, "and they've smuggled in ancient weapons from before the Concordat era. Pulse rifles, shock batons, plasma grenades. They've sealed all access points and disabled our remote systems in that section." The Septari were one of only 2 Concordat species who still maintained warrior traditions and remembered combat as more than history. They were a proud reptilian race whose ancestors had conquered 3 star systems before joining the peaceful alliance. Some Septari had never accepted the transition to a non-violent society, and these extremist groups occasionally caused trouble, but actual terrorism with lethal weapons hadn't occurred in the Concordat for over 200 years. "Can we cut power and vent atmosphere?" Velsha asked. Desperate Telezakoth shook his head with his mandibles clicking in frustration. "They're using independent life support, and they've rigged the bulkheads with explosives," he said. "Any forced entry will trigger detonation. We have negotiators talking to them, but they seem determined to prove humans are weak without their technology." Velsha studied the sealed section layout and felt helpless anger building. The attackers had trapped 26 individuals inside, including Chun. Webb and the other human staff along with them were delegates from 8 different species, none of whom had any combat training or experience with violence. The Septari had planned this perfectly. They'd caught everyone during a late-night diplomatic reception when security was minimal. "What are the humans doing?" Velsha asked while zooming in on internal sensor readings. Arkoth pulled up thermal imaging that showed figures moving in the sealed section. "Internal sensors are being jammed, but we're getting fragmentary data," he said. "The humans appear to be separated from the other hostages and contained in a maintenance area. The Septari are ignoring them for now while they focus on making demands." Velsha watched the fuzzy thermal readings and tried to make sense of the patterns. The human signatures seemed to be moving with purpose, rather than huddling in fear like the other hostages. "Open a channel to the attackers," she ordered. "I'll negotiate directly." For the next hour, Velsha spoke with the Septari leader, a fanatic named Skorath, who ranted about human corruption and the weakness of peace. She tried every diplomatic technique she knew, but Skorath refused to compromise. "Humans are predators who will destroy everything we've built." Skorath hissed through the comm. We will prove they are nothing without their precious technology. In 1 hour, we execute the first hostage, and every hour after until the Concordat expels them." The channel closed, and Velcia slumped in her chair while despair threatened to overwhelm her. Then one of the monitoring stations lit up with activity. "Ambassador, we're detecting unusual power fluctuations in the sealed section," a young technician reported. "Something is happening with the environmental systems." "The humans," Zarkov said while his eyes widened. "They're in the maintenance area with access to station infrastructure." Velcia leaned forward as new data flooded the display's life. Support in the sealed section had begun cycling erratically, temperature dropping in some areas and spiking in others. Lighting systems flickered on and off in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. Emergency fire suppression activated in one corridor for 10 seconds, then shut off. "What are they doing?" Velcia wondered aloud. Jarkov's mandibles spread in what might have been a smile. "Creating chaos," he said with something like admiration in his voice. "Look at the thermal readings now." The Septari signatures had begun moving erratically, while the human thermal signatures had disappeared from sensors. Entire Velcia watched confused as what had been a static hostage situation suddenly transformed into fluid motion. The station's internal communication system crackled, and Webb's voice came through clearly. "Station command. This is Security Chief Webb," he said in a tone that was far too calm given the circumstances. "We've assessed the situation and decided to handle it internally. Recommend you seal all external access points to prevent attacker escape." "Webb, what are you?" Velcia began, but he had already cut the connection on the tactical display. Thermal signatures began winking out one by one. The first Septari went down near a sealed corridor junction, ambushed by something the sensors couldn't detect. 2 more fell in rapid succession in different areas of the sealed section. Scorth panicked voice came over their hijacked comm channel. "What is happening?" he shouted. "The rock isn't responding, and neither is Vulcan. We can't see them." Another voice responded with fear evident. "The lights keep cutting out and something is moving in the shadows." Velcia pulled up every available sensor feed and tried to piece together what was occurring. Peters appeared briefly on thermal imaging, long enough to throw something at a Septari guard. The object struck with enough force to crack the reptilian's skull plate, and he dropped his weapon. Peters vanished again before the guard's companions could respond. In another corridor, a Septari warrior suddenly collapsed while clutching his throat. Medical scanners showed a narrow puncture wound. Something improvised and deadly had struck him with surgical precision. "They're using the station against them," Zarkov said while watching in fascination. "Environmental controls for concealment, maintenance shafts for movement, fabricated weapons from available materials. This is asymmetric warfare at its finest." More Septari fell as the minutes ticked by. Chun appeared on visual sensors briefly, herding freed hostages through a safe corridor while carrying a makeshift spear, fashioned from a broken chair leg, and sharpened metal web materialized behind a Septari warrior and applied a chokehold that rendered the reptilian unconscious in seconds before anyone could react. Webb had disappeared back into the shadows with the fallen warrior's weapon. The human engineer named Sarah Kim had somehow gained access to the sealed section's computer systems. She rerouted power, created false sensor readings, and turned the attacker's own security measures against them. Doors sealed in front of fleeing Septari while opening for the humans, and freed hostages' life support vented atmosphere from occupied corridors, just long enough to disorient attackers before restoring it. Fire suppression systems activated at crucial moments to provide cover for human movement. Scorth's voice grew increasingly desperate over the hijacked comm. "Fall back to the main hall," he ordered. "Defensive formation. Watch all approaches." But the humans didn't assault the main hall. Instead, they systematically isolated each Septari warrior and took them down individually, Some they ambushed in corridors using improvised weapons, fashioned from maintenance equipment and broken furniture. Others fell to traps, tripwires rigged with heavy objects, concealed pits covered with cloth, even modified fire extinguishers turned into crude clubs. The humans moved with such coordinated efficiency that Velsha realized they must have planned this while pretending to be helpless captives. They'd assessed their environment, identified resources, crafted weapons, and developed a complete tactical plan in the time it took the Septari to make their demands by. The time Concordat tactical teams breached the sealed section, the situation had resolved itself. All 12 Septari attackers lay unconscious or restrained while the hostages stood safely in the main hall. Webb and his team had fashioned weapons from anything available. Sharpened metal pipes, weighted cables, even broken glass wrapped in cloth for handles. Shen had organized the freed hostages into groups and established secure positions. Using furniture as improvised barricades, Peter stood guard over the captured Septari with a pulse rifle he'd taken from the first attacker he'd ambushed. The human had figured out how to operate alien technology he'd never seen before through simple observation and experimentation. Vols arrived with the tactical team and stood speechless as she surveyed the scene. Not a single human had sustained serious injury, while 12 trained Septari warriors lay defeated. The other hostages looked at the humans with mixtures of awe and fear, while medical teams began treating the wounded attackers. Webb approached Velsha and gestured apologetically at the improvised weapons scattered around. "Sorry about the property damage," he said while wiping blood from a cut on his forehead. "We had to work with what was available. We didn't have any weapons, so we made some." Velsha's translator must have malfunctioned, because surely she hadn't heard that correctly. "You made weapons?" she repeated weakly. Webb nodded and picked up one of the sharpened metal pipes, chair leg with a maintenance panel edge sharpened against rough concrete. He explained like he was discussing something mundane, not elegant, but the emergency session of the Concordat High Council convened 3 days after the terrorist incident with representatives from all 47 member species in Adandansavasha watched as heated debates raged across the chamber floor, while holographic displays showed footage from the sealed section. "The humans are too dangerous," Councillor Brechter of the Brolic delegation insisted. "They turned a hostage situation into a massacre using nothing but furniture. Nobody died." Chun countered from the human delegation seat. "We exercised extreme restraint and focused on protecting all hostages, including the attackers, once they were subdued." "Restraint?" A whisper delegate's sphere flickered with agitated colors. "Your people manufactured weapons and conducted military operations inside a civilian station. We adapted to circumstances," Chun replied evenly. "The Septari brought violence to a peaceful place, and we responded with the minimum force necessary." The debates continued for hours as various factions argued for different responses. Some wanted humanity expelled immediately, while others saw opportunity in their unique capabilities. A third group, led by Velsha, advocated for understanding before making decisions. Finally, the High Council chair, an ancient being named Elder Shimara, whose species had founded the Concordat, raised all 6 of her appendages for silence. "We are arguing from ignorance," she said in a voice like wind through crystals. "We do not understand what humans are truly capable of or what threat they might represent. I propose we conduct controlled assessments using our war simulation systems. The humans have agreed to participate, and we will use the data to make informed decisions about their place in our society." The chamber fell silent as delegates considered this proposal. War games hadn't been conducted in the Concordat for over 300 years. They were considered unnecessary, relics of a violent past, but the simulation system still existed, maintained by the tactical AI that managed Concordat security. "What parameters do you propose?" Velsha asked carefully. Elder Shimara displayed a holographic battlefield on the chamber's central projector, a neutral planet designated Sigma. 7. Temperate climate. Varied terrain, abundant natural resources, she explained. Humans will face our tactical AI and veteran Septari military units in objective-based scenarios. Humans will be outnumbered 10 to 1 and provided with no weapons or technology beyond basic survival gear, if they are truly as dangerous as some claim. The simulations will prove it conclusively. Chun stood and addressed the council with quiet confidence. We accept these terms, she said. My government will send a team of volunteers to participate in whatever scenarios you design. We ask only that the tests be fair and that you observe with open minds. The council voted and approved the proposal with only minor opposition 2 weeks later. Velsha stood in the observation center above the war simulation complex and watched as human volunteers arrived. 30 humans in plain gray uniforms filed into the briefing room. 25 men and 5 women of various ages. Webb led the group as senior officer, but Velsha noted the humans seemed to have a flat command structure, with everyone contributing to discussions. The tactical AI, designated Combat Analysis System 7, began the briefing with its emotionless synthetic voice. Scenario 1. Resource denial. The AI announced, hostile forces control 3 supply depots containing food, water, and medical supplies. Objective: deny the enemy access to these resources for 72 hours. Enemy strength: 300 Septari warriors equipped with modern weapons and technology. Human assets: 30 personnel with no weapons. Basic clothing and survival tools. The holographic display showed a forested region with 3 fortified positions forming a triangle sep. Ari. Troops patrolled in organized formations, while sensors and automated defenses covered all approaches. Velas thought the scenario looked impossible. 30 unequipped humans against 300 armed warriors defending prepared positions. The simulation began, and Velsha watched in fascination as the humans immediately dispersed into small groups instead of attacking the depots directly. They moved through the forest using terrain for concealment webs. Groups spent the first 6 hours simply observing, mapping patrol routes, identifying weak points, studying enemy behavior patterns. They're doing reconnaissance, Zarka said while watching from beside Velsha. Classic military doctrine. Gather intelligence before committing to action. Other human teams worked on different tasks. Some crafted crude weapons from available materials, sharpened wooden stakes, stone knives, weighted clubs. Others prepared traps and obstacles along likely enemy approach routes. A few humans focused on foraging, identifying edible plants and water sources to sustain themselves. On the second day, the humans began their actual operations. A team of 5 humans created a diversion at Depot Alpha by starting a small fire that triggered alarms while Septari forces rushed to investigate. Another human team infiltrated from the opposite direction. They didn't attack the depot itself, but instead sabotaged the water purification system and contaminated stored rations. The Septari discovered the damage hours later, but by then the humans had vanished. Similar tactics played out at the other 2 depots over the following days. Humans struck at infrastructure rather than personnel, destroying equipment, fouling supplies, creating fear and uncertainty. They used hit-and-run tactics that never allowed the Septari to bring their superior numbers to bear when Septari patrols pursued them. The humans led them into prepared ambush sites with traps and improvised weapons. The simulation ended after 72 hours with all 3 depots rendered unusable. The Septari had suffered 40% casualties from traps, ambushes, and accidents caused by equipment sabotage. Not a single human had been eliminated, though several showed injuries they'd sustained and continued fighting through. Scenario 1 outcome: human victory, the AI announced clinically. Enemy denied access to all strategic resources. The Council observers sat in stunned silence while the tactical AI prepared Scenario 2 over the next week. Humans participated in 8 different combat scenarios. Each one painted the same picture. Humans adapted instantly to any situation and found creative solutions to overcome numerical disadvantages in an urban warfare scenario. Humans turned the city itself into a weapon using building collapses, flooded sections, and controlled fires during a hostage rescue simulation. They infiltrated a heavily guarded compound by disguising themselves as enemy personnel using captured uniforms. A defensive scenario saw humans fortify a position so cleverly that enemies couldn't approach without suffering catastrophic losses to hidden traps. The most disturbing scenario for Velsha came during a prisoner extraction mission. Humans needed to rescue captured allies from a fortified detention facility guarded by 100 Septari soldiers instead of mounting a direct assault. The humans captured a Septari patrol and convinced one warrior to help them. They befriended him over several hours using kindness, humor, and shared rations. The Septari warrior voluntarily guided them through security checkpoints, claiming they were transferred prisoners. The humans rescued their people and escaped without firing a shot. They weaponized compassion. Velsha whispered to Zarkoth in horror. They turned an enemy soldier into an ally through simple humanity. But the final scenario proved most revealing. The tactical AI designed an impossible situation. Humans at 30% strength after previous engagements, facing entrenched enemies with overwhelming firepower. Objective required capturing a fortified command post within 12 hours. Velsha expected human surrender, but instead watched them do something remarkable. They completely changed tactics mid-operation. Half the team created an elaborate diversion that drew away enemy reserves. The team created an elaborate diversion that drew away enemy reserves. The other half didn't attack the command post at all, but instead infiltrated the enemy communication system using captured equipment and sheer persistence. They convinced enemy units that command had ordered a general withdraw. All Septari forces abandoned their positions, believing they were following orders. While humans waltzed into the empty command post, they won through deception and psychological warfare. Elder Shamara said softly. They adapted their entire strategy based on their depleted state. The final simulation ended and the tactical AI compiled its comprehensive analysis. The report displayed across all observation screens and Velsha read it with a sinking feeling. Human combat effectiveness exceeds all projections. The AI stated, key factors include rapid adaptation to changing circumstances, creative problem solving under pressure, psychological resilience, willingness to accept casualties, and innovation in real-time tactical situations. Humans demonstrate pack bonding behavior that increases combat effectiveness. They fight harder when protecting companions. Medical practices allow wounded humans to continue combat operations far longer than baseline projections suggest possible. Most significantly, humans treat combat as a problem-solving exercise rather than a violence competition. They focus on achieving objectives through any available means rather than adhering to rigid tactical doctrines. The AI paused and then delivered its final assessment. Recommended combat doctrine against human forces. Avoid ground engagement entirely, if conflict with humans is unavoidable. Recommend total orbital bombardment before they can establish positions. Once humans control terrain, probability of dislodging them drops to 6 months passed since the simulation trials and the Concordat had adapted to humanity's presence with surprising grace. The Treaty of Steel and Flesh, as historians were calling it, established humanity as a protected species within Concordat. Territory humans agreed to continue following the no-weapons protocols in civilian areas, but the Concordat now understood this restriction. held little real meaning. Chen and Velsha had become genuine friends through countless meetings and cultural exchanges. They sat together now in Velsha's office overlooking Station Harmony's commercial district, where humans and aliens mingled freely. "My people have started calling you the soft guards," Velsha said with amusement in her voice, "because you carry no weapons, yet everyone feels safer with you present." Chun smiled while sipping her tea. "We've gotten similar feedback," she replied. "Several colonies have requested human security consultants, and we're developing training programs, teaching situational awareness, as we call it, how to recognize threats and respond appropriately." Their peaceful conversation was interrupted by urgent alerts flashing across Velsha's communication panel. She activated the holographic display, and her face went rigid with shock. "The Outer Rim colonies," she whispered. "They're under attack." The display showed tactical feeds from 3 different star systems. Massive biological ships tore through Concordat defenses like they were made of cloth. The attackers were unlike anything in Concordat records. Chitinous warriors that moved with perfect coordination and seemed to feel no pain or fear. "The Vexner swarm," Chun said quietly while studying the footage. "We've heard rumors about them from independent traders. The hive mind species that conquers through overwhelming force and perfect tactical unity." Velsha watched in horror as a Concordat defense fleet engaged the Vexner vessels. Aliens fought well using their advanced technology, but the Vexner adapted to every tactic within minutes. They learned from each engagement and adjusted their formations faster than the Concordat commanders could respond within hours. 3 colonies had fallen, and Vexner bioships were pushing deeper into Concordat. Space Elder Shimara called an emergency session of the High Council, and Velsha rushed to attend. The chamber buzzed with panicked conversations as reports flooded in from the combat zones. "Our fleets cannot stop them," Admiral Kreshtar reported grimly. "The Vexner learn from every encounter, and they don't fear death. They're a true hive mind. Each warrior shares knowledge with the collective instantly. We've lost 18 ships and 4,000 personnel, with minimal Vexner casualties." Council members argued desperately about responses. Some wanted to negotiate though the Vex and ignored all communication attempts. Others suggested abandoning the outer colonies and fortifying core systems. Elder Shimara listened to the chaos, then turned to where Chun sat with the human delegation. "Ambassador Chun," she said, and silence fell across the chamber. "Your people have proven themselves formidable in simulated combat. Would humanity be willing to assist the Concordat in this crisis?" Chun stood, and every eye focused on her. "We would be honored to help defend the Concordat," she said firmly. "But I should be clear about what that means. If we deploy military forces, we'll do so according to human combat doctrine. That means accepting casualties, taking risks, and using tactics that might seem brutal to civilian observers. Are you prepared for that reality?" Elder Shimara's appendages summoned a gesture of acceptance. "We invited you into our society knowing what you are," she replied. "We must trust you to do what we cannot." Within 72 hours, human military vessels arrived in Concordat space carrying what they called Marine Expeditionary Units. Velsha watched from the command center as the human ships positioned themselves at the latest Vexner incursion point. The vessels looked smaller than Concordat warships, and sensors showed they carried minimal weaponry. "Why are they so lightly armed?" Zarkov asked with confusion evident. Chen smiled from beside him at the tactical display. "Watch," she said simply. The Vexner bioships emerged from faster-than-light travel in a perfect attack formation. They moved to engage the Concordat fleet with coordinated precision that had proven unstoppable, but the human vessels didn't fight them in space. Instead, they launched thousands of small pods toward the Vexner ships. "Boarding pods," Chun explained. "We're not fighting ship to ship because we'll lose that way. We're taking the fight inside their vessels where numbers and coordination matter less. Velsha watched in fascination as human Marines breached the Vexener bioships and began fighting in the organic corridors. The footage from helmet cameras showed humans adapting instantly to the alien environment. They used the Vexener's own biotechnology against them, rerouting circulatory fluids to create barriers, severing neural pathways to disable ship functions. When Vexener warriors attacked, the humans fought with a combination of modern weapons and improvised tactics. They turned corners into kill zones, used the ship's anatomy as cover, and adapted to the hive mind's patterns. The Vexener can't predict them, Admiral Kreshtar said with wonder in his voice. The hive mind has never encountered opponents who think independently. Every human marine makes different tactical decisions, so the collective can't anticipate their actions. Marines like Webb led squads deeper into the bioships and planted explosives at critical junctions when they extracted. Massive sections of the Vexener vessels collapsed from internal damage, but more importantly, the humans captured specimens. Engineers like Sarah Kim studied the Vexener biology and technology obsessively. Within days, they understood the bioship systems well enough to turn captured weapons against their creators. Human forces began using Vexener acid sprayers, neural disruptors, and even the aliens' own communication signals. They're turning everything into a weapon again, Velsha said to Chun, including the enemy themselves. The campaign continued for 3 weeks as human marines systematically dismantled the Vexener invasion. They didn't fight the way the Concordat fought, with formations and planned engagements. Instead, they used chaos tactics that kept the hive mind constantly reacting. Small teams infiltrated Vexener-controlled colonies and freed populations while causing maximum confusion. Larger units conducted feints and diversions that drew Vexener forces away from strategic objectives. Human intelligence officers even managed to introduce corrupted data into the hive mind network, causing temporary coordination failures. The turning point came during the assault on the Vexener command vessel, a massive bioconstruct that coordinated the entire invasion force. Concordat strategy suggested a massive fleet engagement to destroy the command ship. The humans had a different idea. A single squad of Marines, including Webb, infiltrated the command vessel using captured Vexener genetic material to fool biological sensors. They fought their way to the central control node, while casualties mounted. Peters fell defending a corridor so his teammates could advance. Webb sustained critical injuries, but continued operating on adrenaline and sheer determination. They reached the control node, and instead of destroying it, Sarah Kim hacked into the biological network. She introduced a simple concept that the hive mind had never encountered: doubt. The idea that decisions could be wrong and tactics could fail spread through the Vexener collective like a virus. For the first time in their species' history, the Vexener hesitated. That moment of uncertainty was enough. Concordat fleets exploited the confusion while human marines completed their objectives. Vexener invasion collapsed as the hive mind struggled to process individual uncertainty. Surviving Vexener ships retreated into deep space while human forces secured the reclaimed colonies. Vesha stood in the medical bay where human casualties were being treated. Webb lay in a regeneration tank recovering from injuries that should have killed him. Peters hadn't survived, but 36 other species lived because of his sacrifice. Chun stood beside Velsha and they watched in silence as human medical staff worked with tireless efficiency. Your people paid a heavy price, Velsha said quietly. Chun nodded with grief evident in her expression. We did, she agreed. But that's what soldiers do. They pay the price so others don't have to. Peters knew the risks and chose to take them anyway. Elder Shamara arrived with several other council members to honor the human fallen. She approached Chun with all 6 appendages spread in deepest respect. We asked why humans are lethal without weapons, she said in her crystalline voice. We asked the wrong question. Humans don't need weapons because they are the weapon. Every tool becomes lethal in your hands. Every environment becomes a battlefield. Every challenge becomes an opportunity. We don't fear what you carry because we understand now. We fear what you are. Chun accepted the words with quiet dignity, but shook her head gently. What we are, she said, is a species that survived by adapting and protecting our own. We're predators, yes, but we chose to use those instincts to defend rather than conquer. That's the real answer to your question. Humans are lethal without weapons because we see solutions everywhere, and we never stop trying to protect those we consider ours. Velsha felt her thorax swell with emotion as understanding finally crystallized. The Concordat had evolved beyond violence and achieved peace through millennia of careful development, but they had also become fragile. Unable to defend themselves against true predators, humanity had walked a different path. They retained their predator,